My name is Matt Viser, and I'm the White House bureau chief at the Washington Post.
What an extraordinary job you have now, Matt. How long have you been covering Donald Trump and the White House as a whole?
So I've been covering Trump since 2016 during his first campaign, and I've been based at the White House since Joe Biden took office in 2020 in January. So it's been quite the transition, I think, from Joe Biden to Donald Trump in his second term here.
Looking at the first term of Donald Trump compared to the second term of Donald Trump, have you seen much change in the type of stories you report, the nature of what you're seeing from Donald Trump himself?
Yeah, I mean, the first time around, I think there was, even he was surprised, I think, that he won. So there wasn't the months of groundwork laid for what they were going to do when they took office in early 2017. This time around, they were clearly prepared not only to win the election, but for years of planning from both his team and from allies of his who were ready to take office and had kind of almost a day-by-day plan of what they wanted to do. So this time around, it does feel like they've been more prepared. Trump has the allies and the aides that he wants around him. They're all loyalists. They're all loyal to him in a way that, frankly, 8 years ago when he took office, there were people who took those jobs to be sort of guardrails, to prevent Trump from enacting some aspects of his agenda. This time around, those people are generally not there. And so it's really Trump and his most deeply loyal aides executing his agenda.
Does that mean, do you think, less of a revolving door of secretaries, of advisors, like we saw in the first Trump administration?
So far, yes. I mean, in the one hand, it's still chaotic. I mean, there's still sort of a gusher of news and information and unpredictability around Trump. But on the other hand, it's enacting the things that he wants to enact. And so there has not been as many people, as much staff infighting, in different camps, at least not yet. That could still come. But the first time around, there were different factions within the White House and within his administration. And we're just not seeing that as much this time around.
You've covered the White House and American politics for a long time now. How big a second chance is this for Donald Trump?
I mean, it's unprecedented, really. There's only been one time in history where you've had a president who has had non-consecutive terms like this. So Trump is familiar with what the job entails. He's been through it, for one term, and then he had sort of a break, a 4-year interregnum where he was out of power, out of office, and so I think he learned some things during that time period. And he wanted to enact different things. In some cases, it's retribution against political enemies of his that he's now motivated to go against. But I think it is pretty extraordinary to have a president, have 2 non-consecutive terms and coming back the second time to have almost a do-over where there's not a continuation of 8 full years. It's a break between that I think makes this an extraordinary moment for him.
It's not just the break between. He's come back as a convicted felon, but with the overwhelming support of Americans.
Yeah, and I think the margin of victory was a surprise to a lot of people, but it's given him the feeling of having a much bigger mandate. And so you're seeing him enact a lot of these things without many people speaking out against him. It's changed the construct of his own party. It's changed the construct of the opposition among Democrats. So I think the margin of victory that he came in with, winning all of the battleground states and winning the popular vote in ways that he didn't do in 2016, I think gives him a different tenor setting out in the opening part of his term.
What was it about his campaign that got the Republicans control back not only of the White House, but now with the House and Senate too?
I mean, I think the populism that exists throughout the country, there's a sheer force of personality that he has that I think, frankly, a lot of people, including many in the media, underestimated, in terms of his ability to corral that. Just as the Access Hollywood tape and sort of, in 2016, a lot of people did not think he would win. I think in 2020 or in 2024, a lot of people sort of thought, convicted felon, there's a lot of negatives in sort of a typical politician would not be running in those circumstances. But Donald Trump is, through force of personality and sort of having control over all levers of the Republican Party, was able to overcome a lot of that in order to win this second term.
He was able to overcome a lot of it. People still seem fearful, though, to speak out against President Trump. Why is that, do you think?
I mean, I think you're seeing early in his term a lot of aspects of American society, a lot of traditional institutions that in his first term were sort of geared up to oppose him are now, are doing the opposite. I mean, they're changing their policies. They're trying to appease him in different ways. You're seeing that, through the tech industry. You're seeing that through members of Congress. You're seeing that through universities, changing their policies and almost fearful of welcoming his wrath, of opposing him. And so I think you're seeing a lot of, efforts to sort of stay out of his crossfires.
Because the wrath of Donald Trump can mean being cut off. It can mean losing funding.
Yeah, and that I think is a difference this time. Is he has managed to execute the full powers of the presidency to target universities or to sort of pinpoint exactly what he wants to do and what he wants them to do in order to continue to receive government funding. He's threatened judges. He's kind of become much more aggressive in his use of the powers of the presidency.
He's not scared to take on the courts either. I mean, the Supreme Court is a conservative-leaning court as it stands at the moment. He's not afraid to go after federal court judges. It seems as though there's this constant battle between the president and the courts. How is the power breakdown supposed to happen?
Throughout much of history, there's been a clear delineation between the co-equal three branches of government, and the president is one of those, and the court is another, and Congress is another. And this time around, I mean, Trump has a grip on Congress. And he's trying to have a grip on the courts as well, which creates an extraordinary amount of power in one person and one executive.
It's not the America the founding fathers had in mind.
No, I mean, much of America has been about diverging views, vigorous debate on policies, a check on power. So far, there's not much of a check on Donald Trump's power. So he's trying to sort of gauge how much he can do, how far the limits are that he can take his executive powers in some of these.
It's a situation the United States has never been in before, with a president so openly prepared to put pressure on the Supreme Court in the way that Donald Trump has.
We've seen some of these cases be filed in lower courts, and in some cases, judges are ruling against Trump and some of the things that he wants to do. Trump is sort of, banking on the idea that the Supreme Court, that these cases will reach the Supreme Court, and that the Supreme Court, given its conservative majority, a number of whom he himself appointed his first term, will rule in his favor. I think that's yet to be determined in a lot of these cases, but that's sort of what he's banking on, is that he not only has the executive power, he's got congressional majorities in both chambers, and the Supreme Court is going to be ruling in his favor, is what's going to happen in his mind.
Cross Trump and your career could be over.
Yeah, they're worried about primary challenges. They're worried, about threats that, his allies have made to run against them if they don't vote the way that he wants. We saw this a lot in his nominees. It was sort of extraordinary that, aside from Matt Gaetz, his initial nominee for Attorney General, all of his nominees pretty much got through. And and by most standards, a lot of those nominees did not have the past credentials that we would expect to be running these huge government agencies. And yet Trump was able to get them through in large part because of the grip that he has on the Republican Party.
Covering President Trump in 2025, how different is it to first-term President Trump? What have you seen in the change from him?
I think it does seem more targeted in a way. He sort of has a list of things rolled out almost day by day, executive orders that he's going to sign, foreign leaders that he's going to call. It seems a little bit less seat of the pants than the first term, where he, it still feels chaotic, I think, from most observers' standpoint, but from covering it, there's sort of things that he wants to do each day. And it's an immense amount of information to digest each day and each hour and each minute. But I think he is coming at it with more specifically what he wants to do and the things that he wants to see happen under his term.
He'd said he'd get on with the job, and he is.
Yeah, and there's a sense too of he's got limited time. They have the congressional majorities right now. They have control over Congress. So he can enact his agenda in a way that he may not, the second half of his 4 years if Democrats can take back the House, which seems their likeliest scenario at this point.
One of the first executive orders was January 6, releasing and pardoning those convicted over the insurrection at the Capitol. You were in the area at the time on the day. Your reaction seeing the violence on that day compared to the pardons just a matter of 4 years later?
I mean, it's extraordinary, and I think embodies a little bit of President Trump coming back into power. It was not a secret. It was something that he talked about during the campaign, but it was extraordinary that he did pardon them and it sort of set the tone, I think, for what his presidency was going to be about.
And they weren't just freed. So many of them were excused, pardoned of any crime they were found to have committed.
Yeah, and their records wiped clean, of any actions that day that may have broken the law, and that were found in a court of law to have broken the law. It did send a very clear message, I think, from the beginning.
The 100-day marker is traditionally a decent measure of where you can gauge where a president's at in the first few months of their term. As we sit at it now, how do you analyse the first few months of Donald Trump's second term?
I mean, on the first day, he signed 26 executive orders, more than any president has done on the first day. He gave a joint address to Congress. He spoke longer than any president has, in such an address. So I think it has been a marker of sort of rapid change, rapid movement on executive orders, on changing the way the world looks at the United States and the role that the United States is going to play in foreign diplomacy, and in acquiescence to his will and what he wants to do. So I think the first couple of months of his term have really been marked by just a blizzard of activity coming out of the White House.
He's made this presidency Trump television.
Yeah. There was a moment at the end of the meeting with Zelensky where this explosive encounter, and he had this off the cuff remark where he said, "This is going to be great television," and you do get that sense from him that these are world shattering events, and he sort of views it from a TV perspective.
So is everything just for show?
There's a lot that's for show, but that's not to underestimate the amount that's not for show. I think that meeting in particular collapsing had huge consequences, but Trump recognized the must-see TV aspect of that encounter, that the world was seeing this diplomacy and the collapse of a relationship happen in real time in ways that we don't often see. And I think that's part of what Trump is sort of showing is the full view of what's happening in the White House.
People in this city have covered the Oval Office for decades. Have you ever seen a scene like we saw between President Trump and President Zelensky?
No. And I mean, it was, as we were watching that, I mean, at one point I got up and ran to our editors across the room to say, like, this is a moment, and this is a truly like global encounter that like we were already prepared to write about it, but it sort of became like a much bigger deal than I think anybody was anticipating. And the fact that we were able to see something that often happens behind closed doors and you would hear about it later. There was a frosty encounter or, a sharp exchange of views. In this case,
it was very sharp indeed.
It was very sharp. And we were seeing it all unfold before our eyes.
Some of his other foreign policy aspects, I mean, he's talked about trying to make Canada America's 51st state, take back the Panama Canal, have Greenland be American territory, acquiring Ukraine's nuclear power stations. What is he about with this?
It's interesting because the first term, he had this America First, was sort of the idea of almost a retrenchment that America would take care of itself, and we were not going to be involved in these foreign conflicts. We were going to pull out of foreign engagements and look at our country first. And this time, it's more of an expansionist mode where Trump is wanting the American borders to change and take over these different countries. And I think there's a lot about him that is, a real estate guy. And so I think he's looking at these different countries and the assets that they have and wants them for this country to take over. So he's seeing the minerals deal in Ukraine, or he's looking at the Panama Canal and seeing the potential advantage of having that. Canada and Greenland and strategic advantages of having them. But it's kind of hard to imagine how that's going to transpire in the coming months. You're obviously seeing resistance from the world and from leaders of those countries. So I don't know sort of where that leads, but I think from his mentality, he's in this expansionist mode almost.
He was once a laughingstock, but should he be taken seriously with this?
Yeah, I mean, and initially some of these things seemed like a laugh line, where he would talk about Canada being the 51st state. And I think there was an instinct of like, oh, he's not serious. But the more he talks about it, the more serious he seems to be. I mean, I think the world has kind of learned that you have to kind of take him a little seriously and maybe try to move him off course, but he's going to keep bringing these things up. And sometimes it's hard to differentiate with him what is a negotiating tactic and what is reality and what he seriously wants. And in some of those, it's unclear. But he does seem serious about some of these proposals.
He keeps talking about deals. Everything to him, he says, is a deal. Yeah,
and even talking about early in his first few weeks, talking about Gaza almost as a deal, about the U.S. having a role in rebuilding Gaza and making it the Riviera of the Middle East, as he described. So I think he sees things through a prism of deal making, and that's not to say there's no strategy behind it, but I think his instinct is to create a deal and find ways to gain leverage in any sort of negotiation.
It's a negotiating strategy, isn't it? Isn't he saying these things to ultimately try and get something else, knowing that the party he's trying to do the deal with doesn't want option A?
Yeah, and you saw that a little bit, I think, with his tariffs. Like he'll outline he wants to impose new tariffs, and he wants something out of that deal. So you saw the Mexican president offering to crack down on some of the fentanyl and some of the border, enhance border patrols. And so Trump kind of, at least for a time, was, sort of willing to accept that as a deal. So I think in some cases he's just trying to gain leverage in as somewhat of a negotiating tactic.
So much of what we've seen with him in these early days has been about dominating the news cycle. It's the old Steve Bannon tactic of flooding the zone. Are we seeing flooding the zone all over again?
Absolutely. I mean, every time, he invites reporters into the Oval Office, 45 minutes. It's an hour-long exchange. He sits there and he loves the back and forth. He loves the attention. He loves, being the center of news. And I think we're seeing that, on a daily basis, sometimes an hourly basis. There was one afternoon where 4 times over the course of about 6 hours, he was addressing the media for extended periods of time. And each time he does that, he says something new. He says something that will attract news attention and headlines. And I think it's difficult for the media to keep up. It's difficult for news consumers to keep up. But, there is a flooding the zone aspect that I think he definitely has had.
Do you leave the office, leave the Oval Office and scratch your head and go, where do I turn to from here?
Yeah, many nights. It's and many times you'll listen to him for 45 minutes and there's 6 different things that he said, that in any other presidency would be the driving story. But under him, it's the 6th most important, just because he says so many things all at once that it's hard to sort of figure out which thing to focus on.
So much of the attention, too, has been on his billionaire buddy, the unelected member of cabinet who stands wearing the MAGA wear inside the cabinet room. What should America and the world make of the relationship between Donald Trump and Elon Musk?
There's a lot there. I mean, part of it is, his love of rich billionaires, and so his attraction to Elon Musk as a powerful tech titan, is one aspect of the relationship. The other is the extraordinary power that Donald Trump is giving to Elon Musk. We've seen that through his Doge efforts to cut government spending, and that's had an immense effect, in these first opening 100 days of the Trump presidency. You're seeing that with the transactional aspect. I mean, Trump, when Elon Musk and Tesla were being criticized and in some cases vandalized, Trump staged a whole, car lot, basically on the White House lawn of Elon Musk, and 6 Teslas brought in for Trump to inspect and purchase one of them as kind of turning the South Lawn of the White House into an advertisement for Tesla. As a result of, Trump wanting to sort of benefit his friend and his ally, Elon Musk.
The bromance is still there?
Yeah, it's extraordinary and doesn't have many precedents, I don't think, in American politics. Their sort of close relationship and the amount of time that Elon Musk spends with President Trump.
He was such a significant campaign donor too. Are we seeing in the United States that when it comes to the White House, money can buy power?
Yeah, and in Trump's White House in particular, I mean, there is a lot of people around him who are benefiting through this, and you're seeing that probably most dramatically with Elon Musk, but there are other examples too, and I think that Musk, the surprise is, I think for some, has been that there hasn't been a major clash between them yet. Trump is not somebody who shares power that often, and so the fact that he has given Musk an immense amount of power has been a little bit of a surprise, and there's been no visible clash really between them. I think there's been some tensions within the cabinet, but Trump has really sided with Musk at every step.
Part of his relationship with Elon Musk, again, we talk about this transactional nature. Elon Musk donates to his campaign, gets a high-powered position in government. Elon Musk's private company starts to suffer. Donald Trump turns the South Lawn into a Tesla showroom. Yet continuously we see these images on the television of Teslas being burned, being keyed. There's a sense, there's an anger at what Elon Musk is doing across America.
The first Trump term was marked by protests. There was the Women's March, right before his inauguration. the mood in the Capitol in Washington, D.C. was one of resistance. And we have not seen that this time around. And I think the Teslas and the protests that are happening there are sort of an early sign of people who are not okay with what's happening in the White House are showing that in a visible and visceral way. And they're seeing a reaction from the White House. They're seeing a reaction from Trump and from Elon Musk to that. But it's one of the few signs, I think, that we've seen early in his presidency of any sort of form of resistance or protest or sort of a visible way to express an anger at what's happening in Washington.
But at a time of hurt, Tesla's boss was wrapped by the President of the United States, embraced effectively, selling his cars to the world. And
Howard Lutnick, one of his cabinet members, encouraging people to buy Tesla stock. There's been sort of an embrace and an attempt to sort of boost Elon Musk and boost his companies in response to that. So I think Elon Musk has the full support of the White House, at the moment. And I don't know where those protest movements will lead or if they'll grow into something new or different, and how long they'll continue. But I do think it is a sort of a visceral sign of the opposition that does exist out in the country.
Is the need for the president and cabinet members to boost Elon Musk there? Because if he doesn't and he crumbles, the house of cards falls.
Trump views Elon as an ally and as a supporter, and so he's wanting to, just like the January 6th pardons, help somebody who helped him.
President Trump, salesman Trump.
Yeah, exactly.
Did you expect it to collapse, the relationship to cave in quickly?
At some point, yeah. I mean, and maybe at some point it will, but it is surprising given. I mean, Trump does like to be the center of attention. He likes, being the most powerful person in the room. And in this case, he's giving attention to Musk, and he's kind of elevating him in unique ways.
What is Doge trying to do?
I think that there's it's trying to sort of remake the federal workforce and the way that the American government has typically functioned. It's met resistance, so it's hard to gauge this early how well it's doing. But from the very start, Musk came in and tried to sort of discourage federal employees, tried to fire a bunch of them, reduce the workforce, consolidate the workforce, and frankly, some of it's unclear. I mean, we've seen and reported on a number of Doge employees going in and taking. Overseeing a lot of government data. And I think it's unclear yet sort of where that may head or what the end goal of that is. I think their stated goal is to use it to figure out where the money is going and just try to streamline and cut government waste out. But it's unclear at this point, I think, how successful Doge has been just yet.
It's all well and good to talk about government efficiencies and government savings. People want to find ways to save the taxpayer money in every walk and every day of life. Is there a danger with Doge, though, given effectively what you've got is an unelected billionaire being put in charge of picking who he wants to be on his team and tearing up whatever he thinks needs to be torn up?
I think the thing that we're seeing so far is some of it seems haphazard and quickly making these decisions that have to be reversed. You saw that with them sort of firing a bunch of government employees that then they had to rehire because the courts stepped in. And so there's these quick decisions that seem to be made, sort of break things and then apologize later, if it doesn't work. And the Musk being unelected, I think, has been a focal point, I think, for a lot of people raising concerns, whether that's Democrats or whether that's even people within Trump's own administration, sort of suggesting that he's not accountable because he has not been elected. I think in this case, Trump has sort of stepped in and said, he's acting on my behalf. I'm the one who's elected, and I'm giving him this power. But it is an immense amount of power that Elon Musk has over, a vast federal bureaucracy that he's trying to remake.
something America really hasn't seen before to this extent?
No, I mean, there's been various government efforts to sort of cut back. Bill Clinton did a lot in the 90s and cut the government workforce. But we haven't seen sort of this level in a long time of reorienting the whole federal bureaucracy. And in lots of respects, some of that's employees, some of it is they're trying to sell government property. Some of it is cutting back on U.S. funding abroad through USAID and the efforts that help fund programs all around the world. And so there's a lot of different areas that Elon Musk has been targeting.
Is there a sense too that perhaps the president is setting Elon Musk up to be the fall guy if this doesn't work?
I think Trump does that a lot where he's not going to be the one who pays the ultimate price or takes the blame if something bad happens, but that hasn't happened so far. I mean, there hasn't been something, and I think quite frankly, for Doge, I think the risk comes in things that impact the average American. It's very clear that he's impacting federal workers, people who work for the government, who've dedicated their lives to public service. Elon Musk has had a huge impact on them. But if you're an average American living in the Midwest, you may not be feeling the impacts of what Elon Musk is doing. If that starts happening with Social Security checks or Medicaid or Medicare or other aspects that I think an average American might be hit by, that I think is where the political blowback could come. And in that case, there could become some tension between the president and Elon Musk.
Because I think that's where it's at, really, isn't it? That American voters ultimately decide at the ballot box how their own personal finances are going, how their own personal lives are going.
And you're seeing some of that with, Social Security and the call lines, for example. If Elon Musk is cutting the number of federal employees, an average American may try to call in and get some help and some assistance on something, and they can't reach anybody because Elon Musk has chosen to fire them or chosen to reduce the federal workforce. So, or the FAA, there was some concern, I think, from Sean Duffy, the head of the transportation department, about air traffic controllers. We need more, and Elon Musk was sort of resisting that for a while. So I think if the average American is seeing it and feeling it, I think then the political pressure intensifies on the president and what he's trying to do.
What do you think the president's strategy is behind the use of so many executive orders when it comes to everything from what we see in terms of banking sectors to gender pronouns? What's his strategy behind a flurry of executive orders?
In some cases, it's the only mechanism he may have for the most immediate change. So on day one, for example, getting out of the Paris Climate Accords or getting out of the World Health Organization, they were quickly sort of reversing things that Joe Biden and many before him chose to do. So it's a very quick mechanism for doing some of those things.
Pardoning the people convicted over January 6th?
Yeah, he did that also on day one, using his executive powers to do that. There's a wider message that gets sent with a lot of those, including the January 6th. It's who is he going to side with? He's going to side with the people who invaded the Capitol and protested, violently on that day. And so some of the things that I think Trump is doing is to sort of send a message with reducing the diversity and equity inclusion programs, the DEI programs. He'll sign an executive order that sends a message to universities who rely on federal funding. You guys better get rid of these programs if you want to continue to get federal funding. It sends a message to businesses who have had DEI programs that you better get rid of these if you want to have favorable tax policies or other things that I might try to do. So in some cases, they're to sort of send a message. And then in other cases, it feels like he's sort of testing what the limits are of what he can do. The birthright citizenship, he revoked birthright citizenship, sort of the practice where if you're born in the United States, you're automatically a citizen. He revoked that also in his first day or two of taking office. That's under a challenge in the courts.
Already we're seeing the lawsuits, the cases pile up in the courts. Is it the case that over the course of the next almost 4 years that it is going to be a constant battle still between President Trump and the legal system?
I think that's possible. I mean, that's one check on his power. And frankly, in the opening months of his presidency, we have not seen many checks on his power. The courts in some cases have stepped in, and in some cases, Democrats have tried to sort of raise concerns, but they're out of power. They don't control either chamber. Trump early on got rid of or fired a bunch of the inspectors general who typically in these different government agencies are hired to be a watchdog internally. And he fired them, to prevent, investigations in different agencies. So there's not been a lot of checks on Trump's power. And I think the courts is one avenue, and that, could result in more litigation.
Is it really now the only avenue?
At the moment, yes. His grip on the Republican Party is so strong at the moment, and they control both chambers of Congress. So they're narrow majorities. So that's the only hope for Democrats or opponents of Trump is that he can't convince most of the House members in particular.
But at least he's got this power until 2026 midterms, and then beyond that, he's got the presidency for another 2 years. What do you think will be in his pipeline, his vision that he wants to leave as his legacy beyond 2028?
I mean, the legacy is sort of, remaking our government. Really, I mean, Doge has been such an aspect of what he's tried to do, and I think most historians did not look so favorably on his first term. So he's got a second term now where he really wants to go down as a historically great president, and the great presidents tend to do big things, and so he's doing big things, and the question is how history will sort of look at some of those things.
Trying to take over the world.
Yeah.
There'll be 1,361 odd days to go. Americans backed him all in to be President of the United States of America. Is the country in for a bumpy ride, or is this Donald Trump is going to enact out what he wants to do with his presidency?
I think it will be a bumpy ride, and I think part of that is that the country is still so divided. I mean, Trump did win a majority. He won the popular vote. He won the Electoral College vote. So by all accounts, he's a president with a mandate. But how big that mandate is still a little questionable. The country's very divided, and I think Democrats have been sort of cowed by his dominance, and they have not yet reassembled to figure out how they propose any alternative. But I think that will come at some point over the next 4 years, and you'll have an alternative vision that they try to have for the country. And I think that there will be some clashes for sure to come.
When it comes to the Democrats, say right now, they seem to be leaderless, rudderless, not knowing where to turn to, where to go to. Bernie Sanders has emerged alongside AOC as seemingly one of the early contenders throwing their hands up. Could it possibly be Bernie back in the mix again?
I mean, the party just saw, they considered Joe Biden too old in his 80s. Bernie Sanders also in his 80s. I don't know. It's a party that is completely wide open at the moment. I mean, there's nobody who's stepped in as a strong leader, and you're seeing various people sort of pop up here and there. Governors, there's a lot of governors trying to make a name for themselves. Gavin Newsom has tried to, put himself out there a little bit more. So I think, but by and large, I think the party has been quiet, and they're sort of letting Trump, have control, and they're hoping that Trump overreaches, that he creates some mistakes that they can exploit later. I think there's still time before the midterms, but it's been, kind of remarkable how inactive the Democratic Party has been. And I think part of that's they don't have a leader. They don't have anybody, to look to. Joe Biden, was their former leader.
Is it also because they spent 4 years effectively trying to get rid of him, having removed him from office, only to have Donald Trump come back and win? Are they speechless? They don't know how to handle him?
I think there was a feeling probably in 2020 of we finally vanquished Trump for good. And then I think as you saw the legal system run its course, as you saw him as a convicted felon, I think Democrats, again, felt, okay, like we can beat a convicted felon, surely. Then they saw Joe Biden and his debate performance, Joe Biden's unwillingness to get out of the race for several weeks and months, and then Kamala Harris not being able to win that election. So I think they're sort of in a state of shock and sort of what to do next, who to look to. I think the one benefit for them is that midterm elections tend to go to the party not in power, so they would probably have an advantage in the midterms, which would then create at least one chamber of Congress being a check on Trump's power. And then given term limits, Trump would not be able to run again for a third term, and they would have to face somebody different.
He jokes about running for a third term, raising money to run for a third term. Someone's even tried to put in an amendment to the Constitution to allow him to run for a third term. Is it possible?
I think it's not possible, but it's like how we were talking earlier about, it's hard to tell sometimes when Trump is joking and when he's, doing it to try to lay the groundwork for something. And he does continue to joke about a third term. So it's hard to tell how much of that is actually legitimate and that he will make some sort of attempt and, which would trigger all kinds of legal challenges and reasons to not allow him to run again.
He'd be 82.
He'd be 82, yeah.
Joe Biden wasn't 82.
Joe Biden, yeah.
If Donald Trump is the sort of king of MAGA, you've got J.D. Vance sitting in the wings now. Where do the Republican Party turn to next? Is it somebody like J.D. Vance? Could Donald Trump Jr. emerge from the mix? Where do they go?
It's interesting because J.D. Vance would be the most likely candidate. He's the vice president. He's somebody who Trump picked. But early on in Trump's term, just a few weeks ago, he was asked, would J.D. Vance be his successor? Would he be endorsing him? And he declined to sort of state that J.D. Vance was the heir apparent. And you also saw, I think, in that meeting with Zelensky, J.D. Vance trying to sort of assert himself more, perhaps after seeing with frustration all the attention that Elon Musk has gotten, as Trump's kind of buddy. And so I think Vance will probably assert himself or try to assert himself as the heir apparent. But I don't know that will be the case. I think it's going to be a vigorous fight probably on the Republican side. And I would imagine that Trump will sort of relish the idea of different people competing to be his most worthy successor.
Trump TV is a 4-year episode of The Apprentice.
Yeah. And maybe somebody will get fired at the end. Who knows?
When we look at the Trump cabinet as it stands now, he's picked well-polished, well-spoken people that he thinks can perform well in front of television. They've had a slip-up early, texting about war issues in Yemen with a journalist exposed. This sort of idea of using encrypted messages amongst government figures. Is this done around Washington, D.C.?
Certainly, not in terms of matters of national security. I think it's done a lot with, top officials and reporters. And, there's a texting environment, I think, that exists in Capitol Hill and in the White House. And you're sort of constantly trying to exchange information and ideas. I think the gobsmacking part of this exchange is that it was involving matters of national security. There are secure environments that are created on Capitol Hill and the White House and the Pentagon for officials to go in order to discuss any sort of sensitive issues. The Situation Room is one example where you exchange ideas, you exchange highly sensitive information to prevent it from being hacked or end up in the wrong hands. And in this case, they were not doing that. I mean, they were doing it over signal over an encrypted, text messaging, to sort of provide sensitive information about an American military operation. So it's quite extraordinary. I think the degree to which they were talking about these sensitive issues. That's different, I think, from sort of the typical exchanges that I think happen all around Washington over, sort of gossip and, parlor games and, sort of the typical things that people may text.
It's a bit of a case of oops.
Yeah, it's a big oops.
When the president is going through what he is going through in terms of his tariffs issue, when he's looking at the domestic economy issue, there are some people out there who are saying economically people should trust him. He's a businessman. Is there a method to what people might be perceiving as his economic madness?
I think in general, I feel like with the economy, there's it gets back to sort of the America first sort of thing. He doesn't like when the United States is losing money to other countries. And so you see that with tariffs, and he doesn't like a trade imbalance. So I think that is kind of his guiding star economically around the world. And he doesn't like when American-based companies are producing things abroad. So he's really trying to get them, and he's very much touts anytime there's a big manufacturing company built in the United States. So I think that seems to be one of his economic kind of, it's an America first aspect of his economic policy.
How often now is Donald Trump the front page of the Washington Post or stories related to President Trump?
I mean, it's hard to think of a day when he's not. I think on a daily basis, and sometimes it's multiple. Sometimes it's the whole front page. Just he's creating news and domestically and internationally on a whole host of fronts.
You need more pages in the paper?
We could expand. Yeah.
More subscribers online, more digital space. On that, as part of all of this coverage related to President Trump, the Washington Post created the Trump Tracker, an idea of keeping track of everything the president was up to. What was the idea behind bringing all of that into play?
I think it sort of comes out of the idea that we recognize that it is hard to keep up. It's hard to keep up with the amount of information coming out of the White House. So we wanted to, have a tracker and have a newsletter and have people who could, come, for a reliable source of information and sort of digest it all. And some of it is quick, small bites of information, and some of it is a link to a much broader, more in-depth investigative piece or sort of a way to just sort of get a handle of all of the information that's coming out of the Trump White House. And so that's what our team is trying to do and provide so that readers can, have one source of information that they can go and try to keep track of everything that the president is doing.
How hard is it to keep track of everything he's doing?
Yeah, we also have 8 reporters at the White House, which is a larger team than we've ever had, covering the White House, and 2 editors. And it's a lot of staff work to ideally absorb and digest a lot of information and then try to figure out what the most relevant pieces of information for readers is going to be.
Is the Trump administration keeping you that busy you lose sleep at night?
Yeah, there are nights when you're up at 2 a.m. trying to chase down something, or you're up late at night trying to figure out or make sense of something that he said. He keeps a busy schedule, and he keeps us pretty busy as well.
When it comes to, obviously, the work the Washington Post has done has been integral and known for decades. It is highly regarded around the world. Editorial integrity and independence is something it stands for. When you see the way Donald Trump is treated, or that this White House has treated certain aspects of the media, the treatment of the Associated Press, for example, does the White House Corps stand in solidarity with that? Is it a shock to the system? How do you respond when you see the leader of the country going after what is essentially supposed to be the free press?
Our former editor, Marty Barron, during the first Trump term, had a saying that is still on the wall at the Washington Post that says, "We're not at war, we're at work." And I I still feel that a lot of times where we're not in an adversarial, fighting a battle with the White House. There are days where it feels like that, but I think as a general purpose, we are there to try to do the best that we can to get information from the White House, figure out what they're doing, hold them to account, and publish information that is of interest and is of value so that readers can make sense of everything that's happening there. I think the White House, in particular the Trump White House, at times makes it harder to do that. And I think they've made it harder for the Associated Press to do that in some circumstances of restricting their access. And we will sign on and sort of act in solidarity in some cases with our colleagues in the media writ large. But in general, I think we're there not to pick a battle, but to sort of find the best ways that we can to get information and to translate that and transmit it to readers.
He's also embracing new media, social sites, bloggers, YouTubers, streamers. I mean, this is a 21st century presidency in a way, trying to deal with a new wave of media.
Yeah, and like frankly, some of those voices are welcome. I mean, the White House has had new media. They have a new media seat in the briefing room. I'm sort of the belief that the more questions from the more diverse outlets, the better. It gets more problematic when you're restricting sort of outlets that have traditionally been there and have a long track record of covering White Houses for generations, and sort of have expertise in that regard. But I think, they are, there's no shortage of information or ways to get information out of this White House. I mean, I think President Trump frequently is on television. He's there to ask shouted questions at. I think institutionally, there's a little bit of a figuring out how access may be restricted, and the White House has tried to restrict certain reporters, and that's some of their vindictiveness against outlets that they don't like or certain reporters that they don't like, and I think that can get problematic in some instances.
We see his coverage on the television, his exchanges in the Oval Office. You've worked in the White House for years now. What's he like as a person to deal with?
He will tell you what he thinks, and he'll push back against certain questions. And he'll get aggravated sometimes, but he engages with the media more than any president I've had experience of covering. So he's an open book in that regard, where you sort of know what he's thinking on any given moment. What you see on TV is sort of an accurate portrayal of what he is like in these exchanges. And he comes over to us a lot. He comes over as he's getting on a helicopter. He comes to the back of Air Force One to talk. He's very accessible in terms of, getting your question asked. He may not answer it the way that you expect, and sometimes not in a polite way if he doesn't like the question. But there is plenty of opportunity, I think, to approach him and to ask him things.
He's accessible, but at the end of the day, you guys are on there just doing your jobs, right?
Yeah.
When Australians and people around the world are looking at the Trump administration over the next 3 years and 9 months or so left of this term, what are you looking out for of Trump 2.0? Where could the next headline come from?
I think I'm interested. There's a whole range of things that are he's trying to do around the world that I think are kind of fascinating, and what America's role is in the world, and that has been a big marker of his time in the first 100 days in office. He's tried to exert influence in the Middle East, Russia and Ukraine, Panama, Greenland, Canada. I'm still fascinated on where all of that goes. He's planted seeds in some cases for what he wants to do. He clearly has some idea of Ukraine and Russia, some idea in Gaza, but where those things take us, and whether there is a true expansionist mode for the United States to have any sort of role in some of these other countries, I think those are still unanswered at this point. So I think those are sort of some of the things that are sort of fascinating to see what he ends up doing, how engaged he is in the G20, in the G7, and all these global alliances that have
NATO.
existed in NATO. I went on many trips with President Biden to these international conferences. I don't know what Trump's attitude is going to be like in those, how he interacts with foreign leaders. We've gotten a window into that these first couple weeks and months in his term, but I think that's going to be a fascinating story to watch.
So many aspects of the American government still regard China as the greatest strategic threat this country faces over the course of the next 50 years. Little mention from President Trump so far. Do you get a sense something is going to happen in that space? Or is it just the Middle East, Russia, Ukraine? It's a lot on your plate already.
Yeah, he's going to add China to the mix. But yeah, China was the outgoing Biden administration, in talking to some of those officials, the things that they were imparting or trying to impart on their incoming Trump officials was to consider China as the chief geopolitical foe of the United States. And I think Trump absorbed that. But there has not been a huge amount, aside from maybe tariffs, that he's done, to sort of brush back China. And so I think that's yet to sort of be determined, is how, vigorously President Trump will, align the United States against China.
Trump 1.0 was accused of cuddling up too much with dictators around the world, whether it was Kim Jong-un or whether it was the likes of Vladimir Putin, or how he dealt with China's President Xi Jinping. He says he wants to be a peacemaker. Can he lead America as the continued leader of the free world? Is he likely to keep its position in the rule of order within the world?
It's interesting when he talks about being a peacemaker and wanting to end wars, because I sort of feel like Trump 1.0 was not necessarily that. I mean, he was wanting to get the United States out of its role as a leader diplomatically around the world. Pulling out of NATO was something he talked about a lot. Not having as much of an exertion around the world. That seems different this time around, especially with Ukraine and Russia saying that he wants to end that, and he talks about it in ways of the killing that he's seeing, and he's talked about the Middle East that way too, so it does seem like he's trying to exert himself more in those conflicts while not committing much of American blood and treasure in either of those. He's not really talked about the American military being involved in any of that, or spending much money in any of that, but he wants to use the influence that the United States has to help see those conflicts to an end.
Is it a case he's learnt then from the first time around when he got investigated over his ties and campaign's ties to Russia? This time around, he wants to come across with a better understanding of the way the world works?
Maybe. I feel like some of it, frankly, with Trump is usually he's seeing a political opening. So I think there's a part that I've been struck by in his first couple months is how much he talks about Joe Biden. He talks about his predecessor almost on a daily basis, where he mentions something that Joe Biden did and he's doing the opposite, or something that Joe Biden failed in and now he wants to succeed in. So a lot of times American presidents, leave their predecessors in the past and are sort of more forward looking. So I think Trump in some ways sees these conflicts as things that Joe Biden couldn't fix, and so he wants to prove that he can. And so I think sometimes it's more of Trump's motivation to prove Joe Biden wrong and to do something in areas that he, conflicts that happened, under Biden's watch that Trump wants to figure out how to solve.
Given he campaigned so heavily on the economy and cost of living, whether it was eggs or gas or bread or milk, is that still going to be the number one issue that will be at front of mind for Americans 2026 and then 2028?
I think so, and I think that's the risk for President Trump, frankly, is that the economy, there's still some signs of positivity, but the price of eggs has not gone down that much, and the price of groceries has not gone down that much. And Trump will talk about it and try to suggest that he's doing something about it or that he will do something about it. But those are risks, I think, because I think those are things that affect the average person and that they can sort of feel and maybe blame President Trump for not doing because it was such a big part of his campaign.
And every day too, we still see stories of person X has security clearance revoked, person Y has security clearance revoked, person A has security detail revoked. How much of Donald Trump's presidency so far has been about retribution?
There's been a fair amount. I mean, I think, and some of that comes like he felt like he was being persecuted and prosecuted by the Department of Justice, and so he comes in and he wants to, sort of get his revenge, and so you're seeing that, with some of the Biden administration officials and people whose security clearances he's revoked. He said he heard about Hunter Biden, the President Biden's son, still having Secret Service protection. So by the end of the day, Trump was revoking the protection for Hunter Biden and Ashley Biden, the children of Joe Biden. So I think there is an aspect of him that there's a coming for retribution against his political opponents. There was also a remarkable moment when the president went to the Department of Justice. Typically, presidents try to keep an arm's length between them and the Justice Department as just a matter of ethics and a matter of making sure that there's no even perception of a conflict of interest. President Trump went right to the Department of Justice and gave a speech that felt very much like a campaign speech, or like a speech that people who watch his campaign would be familiar with, where he's criticizing the FBI and he's criticizing the Justice Department, and kind of feeling like he's vindicated from everything. So I think there is an aspect of him that is sort of settling old scores in some ways.
Earlier, you talked about the division that still runs deep across parts of America. President Trump, as we've said, wants to be a peacemaker. Can he heal the divided states of America?
I don't know that he's the one to do that. I think that there's enough Democrats who have such an animosity for him, and the direction that he's trying to take the country is so diametrically opposed to what they believe in, that there's a large swath of the country that I don't know will go along or will be convinced by him. But right now he's got all levers of power, so there's nothing restricting him from doing that. I just don't know long term whether that changes and that the political divides that exist in this country are going to be healed by Donald Trump.
So people watching around the world, hold on.
Yeah.